Hare Krishna, everyone. All glories to Prabhupada. Mother Devaki, or Devaki Devi Dasi, has written 5 books. And out of her 5 books, two of them have a huge section or a significant section on dressing, on dress code. And so in this video, I'm going to critique what she says about dressing in Krishna consciousness. And I'm going to start by saying I have nothing against Devaki Dasi. I think what she writes specifically about dress code is nonsense. It is unjustified or unsubstantiated by Shastra. And more importantly, it is dangerous. It is a dangerous preaching for individual devotees, householders, as well as dangerous for the non-devotees who, because of this type of preaching, which I actually literally call violent, are barred, are checked, are slowed down, are filtered away, are kept from experiencing the wonderful nectar of Krishna consciousness. Now, even though that's what I believe, I respect her as a person. I respect her as a Vaishnavi. I've had, interactions with her for years. She's always very respectful, self-controlled. She doesn't lose her calm. She doesn't get angry. She's well-behaved. She is very dedicated to Krishna consciousness. She's a strong sadhaka. I also very much appreciate the other stuff that she writes in her books, although I haven't read them all, but I've heard her sort of traditional or her stressing traditional family values is something I recommend devotees should, listen to and do more. So I appreciate and respect her position in trying to challenge sort of woke feminist, unhealthy feminist tendencies in ISKCON. So as a Vaishnavi, if I was dying and she was right there in my ear chanting Hare Krishna, I couldn't ask for more. Okay. So I just want to preface this. Now, coming though to what she says about dress code, here we go. I'm going to read to you. The first book she wrote was called Spiritual Culture, and she mentions dress code in there. And in her later book, The False Ego, she refers to this section. So it really all boils down to here. She basically copies and pastes a lot of what she writes here in her False Ego book. So I'm going to read to you what she says in the section called fashion in materialistic culture, and then fashion in spiritual culture. And as I read, I'm going to comment. So again, I hope Devaki can listen to this. I hope her followers can listen to this because again, don't throw the baby with the wash water. She has wonderful contributions to make to ISKCON and to the mission of Lord Chaitanya when it comes to understanding what is culture and how to implement culture and what is Krishna's culture, especially in a modern Western context. I think she has misunderstood. She's totally, let's read. Fashion in materialistic culture, in the mode of ignorance. So she divides culture, materialistic culture, fashion in the materialistic culture, according to passion, ignorance, and goodness. Okay, good. In the mode of ignorance, she writes, dirty, torn, neglected, for instance, new jeans that are pre-ripped, so they look artificially old, clothing that doesn't fit properly, pants hanging down to the knees, and when we bend over, the whole backside is showing. Actually, our fashion designers are running out of ideas because everything has already been done. Thus, their ideas become more and more crazy and affected by the mode of ignorance. Okay, now, of course, she's talking about materialistic culture as if it's all Western. From the very beginning, Devaki is making the mistake that many devotees make, and that is to pit, or to, to pit the West against India, of course, and then whatever's bad in terms of materialistic, it has to be Western. And whatever's good, it's Indian. So everything good is Indian, everything bad is Western. When the fact is that the mode of ignorance, as well as the mode of goodness, act out and affect all geographical locations on this planet. So obviously we agree here. Mode of ignorance, torn jeans, dirty, neglected, attracting unnecessary attention to one's body. Yes, obviously. But again, it's not only in the West. It's all over the planet. Okay. Mode of passion, fashion in the mode of passion, revealing the body and attracting the opposite sex, granted, inviting sense gratification and feeding the fever of lusty desires, good, very tight-fitting and see-through materials used to emphasize the bodily lines and figure, we got it. The motto is to show off, I am so special, unique, and extraordinary. Name brands are designed to increase the false ego, fine. But we also see, for example, what I call the Loy Bazaar elitist club, the Loy Bazaar designer fashion club. And you see this at kirtan melas, you see this at gatherings of devotees where, devotees get their custom tailored kurtas and tailored saris, in Loy Bazaar, India, the cloth market that is very happy that ISKCON has grown because they've become millionaires thanks to ISKCON. And so you've got the matching border of the kurta that matches the border of the dhoti, and it's Rajasthani style with buttons here, or you can tie them up here and so on. Excuse me, like Trump would say, excuse me. The point is that desiring name and fame, desiring pratishta via the clothes we wear is done in any fashion, in any style, whether Indian, or if you want to call it Vedic, or Westerner, or Zulu, or Taiwanese, or Mongolian, or Siberian. If you have a heart that desires, attention and sense gratification from others, then no matter what style or culture that you function in terms of the clothes you wear, you're going to dress in a provocative way. But Devaki seems to think that somehow or other, when you wear a dhoti and a kurta and a sari, you're somehow shielded. You're somehow freed from this influence of desiring to attract people to your body. If that was the case, how come all prostitutes in Dhaka or in West Bengal or Bangladesh or, in countries where women wear saris in general, how come they're wearing saris? Conversely, we could say, how come, butchers in India or in Bangladesh, kill animals, slaughter even cows while wearing dhotis? It's a fact. You can look on Google and you'll find pictures of butchers wearing dhotis. So somehow Devaki has this idea that's, you're influenced by Maya, by lusty desires, but somehow, when you put on Indian clothes, you're free from that. You're shielded from that influence. It's nonsense. Let's continue. In the mode of goodness, decent, neat, and clean. Good point. But again, that can be done in any style, in any cultural way of dressing. Covering the body nicely, such as Laura Ashley fashion. So here it's interesting. She talks about Laura. I don't know who Laura Ashley fashion is, but I guess it's a sort of a conservative Western style of dressing where women, dress in a way that's not too revealing, but at the same time kind of modern and decent and attractive. Okay, great. It's not extravagant and doesn't call attention to oneself. Long skirts, buttoned up blouses, Punjabi suits, or the salwar kameez. I can't wait to wear a salwar kameez. I hope I can transition and identify as a woman so I can start wearing salwar kameez, or maybe in my next life. With baggy pants. For the men, simple and neat attire. Okay, good. So here we are in the mode of goodness. She's nailed it. Mode of goodness means clean, neat, modest, doesn't attract unnecessary attention to your body. Good. So now, ladies and gentlemen, my dear devotees, as Satchidananda Swami would say, now we get where the big speculation is. We get here where the big speculation is. I'm going to read to you now. Fashion in spiritual culture. She writes as a small introduction, we can easily understand that those different kinds of fashions are not only an expression of the person's consciousness wearing them, but they also promote that same mood of nature to which it belongs, and thus may influence other people's consciousness around them in a subtle way. Okay, granted. So now here's the big speculation. And here's where Devaki has got it so wrong, and it's so violent, and it's so speculated and unjustified by Shastra. It's just crazy. Any fashion that reminds us of God can be viewed as transcendental fashion. So she brings that, so that there's something called transcendental fashion. Okay, so what's implied here is that basically it's this. You have to imitate, if you dress in a way that imitates the descriptions of how the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna and Radharani, and the cowherd maidens of Vrindavan and the cowherd boys of Goloka Vrindavan, or Vrindavan, in Braj, when Krishna descended to this earth, we believe, if we can somehow imitate that dress, as described in the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam primarily, then that dress is transcendental fashion. Sounds good. The only problem is that there's zero justification for doing this anywhere in Shastra. I haven't found it in 25 years of searching. But let's read. Any fashion that reminds us of God can be viewed as transcendental. We can observe that every religion and spiritual path has its spiritual fashion. The Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, etc. Looking at the dress of a Christian nun, for example, we can find the same principle as when a sari is worn in a traditional way, not in the more modern style often seen these days. The entire body, including the back and the head, are covered. The universal principle of reducing the male-female attraction is maintained. Now, Devaki, I don't think, has a lot of understanding or experience of world religions and the way they dress. And here's a small parenthesis that we have to really get into here. There's basically three models. When you look at the religions of the world today and you look at them through the lens of dress, there are basically three different types of models. And I raised this actually in the interview with Namras Prabhu and Venkat Prabhu on the Namras podcast towards the end of the video. There's a link for it here. I'll link it up here and you can go to the end and listen to it, although Venkat was always butting in and interrupting me and I couldn't make my point. There's model A, where nobody in the religious group wears any type of dress that distinguishes them from the rest of society, neither the priests nor the congregation member. Example, Protestant, especially evangelical Christians. The pastor, as they say actually, even in evangelical Christian circles, the pastor should smell like the sheep. In other words, the pastor should dress in a way that the congregation member can identify with him. So the pastor, when he's giving his lecture or his sermon on the Bible, standing behind his pulpit, is wearing, if it's a sort of a traditional church, a suit and tie or business casual. And if it's more of a hip church like Hillsong, he may, wear jeans and a clean t-shirt, and a tattoo of Jesus or something. But the point is, he has no religious uniform, okay? And then the people in the congregation who are sitting in the congregation in the pews also dress exactly like atheists or mainstream people in the country, for example, they live in, okay? So that's model A. No uniform for the priests, no uniform for the congregation member. And the big question is, where does Vaishnavism fit? Which one of the three, and I'll describe the next two, which one of the three does Vaishnavism resemble the most? Really important question. And Hinduism in general, Sanatan Dharma in general, and Vaishnavism specifically. But model 2, we just saw model A, no uniform for either priests or congregation member. Model 2, uniforms for the priests, no uniform for the congregation members. Good example, the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church or the Orthodox Christian Church, either Greek or Russian. The priests, who are, at least in the case of the Catholic Church, they must be monks. In the case of the Orthodox Church, you can have married priests, but when they're there giving their homily or their sermon, what to speak of when they're, performing ritual with the sacraments and stuff, they're wearing a uniform, a religious uniform that distinguishes them from anyone else in society, because no one else in society wears exactly what those uniforms. No one wears those uniforms. So, the priest, the Catholic priest, either with the long robe, but, often like this little collar, what a Catholic priest looks like. And you also know what an Orthodox priest looks like. So that uniform is unique in society. No one except the Catholic priest or the Orthodox priest wears that uniform. We agree. Now, the congregation, though, the Joe and the Mary or the Joseph, or when I'm using Christian names or whatever, the congregation, the Michael, the Juliette, who come to church on a Sunday, they wear, again, clean, mode of goodness, as Devaki mentioned, your Sunday best clothes, but it's not a distinct uniform that distinguishes them from people outside of their religious community. We agree. So that's group B. So we have group A, no uniform at all, neither for the priests nor for the congregation. Group B, like the Catholic Church, for example, uniform only for the priests and no uniform at all for the congregation member. And then you have group C, model C, where not only is there a distinct uniform for the priests, but there's also a distinct uniform for all the congregation members. Example, certain Orthodox Jewish groups like Shabbat, who, all of them, whether they're a rabbi or whether they're just an ordinary, lawyer or doctor or taxi driver who's from that religious community, they all wear what? The typical suit, black suit with a white shirt from Eastern Europe, from the, late 1800s or early 1900s, with the black hat. Or the Sikhs, at least after Guru Gobind Singh, because before Guru Gobind Singh, from Guru Nanak up to Guru Gobind Singh, it's a little, parenthesis here with the Sikhs, they had no uniform. It was very much a come as you are. But then Guru Gobind Singh's, I think the 8th Guru after Guru Nanak comes and sort of militarizes the whole Sikh tradition, establishes something called the Khalsa. And now all of a sudden, at least the men, if you're part of the Sikh tradition, whether you're a teacher or guru, or a priest, or whether you're just, again, a congregation member, you have at least maybe not even clothes, but you have very distinct symbols like the turban, the beard, like there's this called the 5Ks, a bracelet, a little knife. So, and all the men, again, regardless of whether they're priests or just congregation members, have a distinct uniform. Another example, the Amish or the Mennonites in America. And again, whether they're priests or I don't know if they call themselves elders or pastors or whatever, but that entire community has, that traditional, I guess, newcomers to America, 16th, whatever, 17th century, 18th century clothes. Apparently they're not supposed to anything, the beard and the hat. You've seen Mennonites and Amish. And again, if you're a congregation member in the Amish or Mennonite community, you distinguish yourself from the rest of, let's say, Pennsylvania because of the way you dress. Okay? So why do I mention this? Because here at Devaki, and now we're going back to Devaki, she's making this generalization that in every religious group, you have a sort of a fashion, a way of dressing that corresponds to that particular group. No, only in Group C. Only in Group C, the Amish, the Mennonites, the Sikhs, and even the Sikhs don't have some sort of clothes. Again, it's just symbols, like external articles, like the turban and stuff like that. And the women, I don't think they have anything that distinguishes them from other Hindu or Muslim or whatever, secular woman. So only in that hardcore third model, which is very small around the world, do all members of society wear a distinct uniform that's like a Jewish uniform or a Sikh uniform or a Mennonite or Amish uniform that applies to everyone in that society. Only a small group, a small sector of society has that model, right? But here she tends to say, why? Because she wants to justify this stupid, crazy belief which has hurt the spreading of Krishna consciousness in the modern world outside of India so much, and which is so much ingrained in so many of our leaders, unfortunately, that Krishna consciousness, bhakti yoga, is kind of like model C, where not only are the gurus, whether grihastha gurus or sannyasi gurus, not only do they have a distinct way of dressing, the dhoti, the kurta, saffron or white, doesn't matter. It has, a dhoti and a kurta, shaved head and shika for men and women, saris. And that is the Vaishnava dress. That is the transcendental dress. It reminds us of Vishnu. It doesn't remind me of Vishnu. But anyway, that's the argument that Devaki is trying to put forth from the very beginning of her speculation. She's trying to establish that, hey, just like other groups have religious uniforms for their entire community, priests and congregation included, so the Vaishnavas also do. Wrong, Devaki, wrong. The large majority of religious groups on earth have a uniform only for their priests, and sometimes not even for their priests, again, such as the Protestants and evangelical Christians, which are the majority, by the way, in America, in Germany, in Australia. In Western Europe, it's more the Catholics. Unfortunately, the evangelicals, they think that America should die on the cross for Israel and spend, billions of dollars supporting the country, the state of Israel. But that's another topic altogether. But at least in terms of dress, they don't have at all a uniform that's an evangelical Christian uniform. They have no uniform at all. And the Catholics, again, the example of Group B or Model B, the middle one, have dress only for the priests. But if you're a congregation member who comes to the Sunday feast, quote unquote, you just come in your normal Western Sunday best with your children and your husband, and you're just dressed normally. And as soon as you step outside that church, no one can tell if you're a Catholic or not, right? That's the large majority of religious people on earth. And as a matter of fact, and I should bring this up because, again, Devaki is trying to convince you and convince us that putting on dhotis and saris somehow, first of all, is transcendental. Ooh. And, as soon as you put those clothes on, you're somehow freed. You become a pure devotee, basically. But secondly, she's trying to convince you that traditionally, the Vaishnavas have always distinguished themselves from non-Vaishnavas, even in India, by, a dhoti and a kurta and a sari, which is wrong, which is totally wrong. Historically, the large majority of women in, let's say, Sanatan Dharma traditions who have, worn saris are not Vaishnavis. The large majority of men, past, present, and future, who wear and wore and will wear dhotis are not Vaishnavas. So that's the first point. So then she says you have nuns, for example, nuns and monks. But that's no longer a question of a religious tradition altogether. It's a consideration of ashram. Monks have a uniform. Nuns have a uniform. Okay, fine. But then don't start saying that all the members of a religious community have to have a particular uniform or have a particular uniform that distinguishes them from the rest of society. I mean, some do. Again, the Amish, the Mennonites, the Sikhs, but Vaishnavas never have. And in fact, we can make the argument that when you look at the Sanatan Dharma traditions together, let's look at, and I tried to make this point again with Namras and Venkat Bhatt, and I kind of made it, but who is the religious authority in Varnashram and in different, Vedic or Indic or Sanatan Dharma traditions? Who's the authority? It's the Brahman, right? It's the Brahmana. I mean, in Vaishnavism, we believe that, Kiba Vipra Kiba Nyasi Shudra Keneno Ye Krishna Tattvaveta Se Guru Hoy, whether you're a Shudra or a Brahman or whatever, if you know Krishna, you can become a guru. And therefore, in our tradition, we have many examples of great gurus and acharyas who did not come from a Brahman background. Narottam Das Thakur, for example, he initiated Brahmins, but he himself was from a Kayasta caste. Haridas Thakur comes from a Muslim family, technically an untouchable, and he's the Namacharya. So our tradition is very much, hey, if whatever, it's very much merit-based. If you're a Vaishnava, if you know Krishna, then it doesn't matter whether you come from a Brahmin family or from an untouchable family. If you know Krishna, you're a guru, right? So, but generally in the Indic traditions, the Brahmin has, let's say, the role of a priest, isn't it? I mean, that's what he's a Brahmin for. Now, when you look at the Brahmins in India, for centuries, again, whether they're Shaivites or whether they're Smartas or whether they're Vaishnavas or whether they're whatever, or let's say whatever theological school the Brahmin X or Y belongs to, the Brahmins do not have a religious uniform that they put on when they go on the altar, quote unquote, or when they give a lecture. This idea of a religious uniform that you have to put on in order to represent God is actually, we could say, very much an Abrahamic influence. A Christian, aside from the Protestants and evangelicals, who I think have got it right, and who therefore I think correspond a lot more or the most to Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement, or even to the Brahmin, way of living and dressing, paradoxically. It's very much an Abrahamic thing where you put on a large cloak and you put on some sort of throne or hat, and then, this and that and this and that, and then you perform the ritual, You look at India centuries back, even including today, you take a Shaivite Brahmin, for example, in Madurai or in Varanasi. When he's at home, playing with his children or going to the market to buy his vegetables or whatever, he's wearing his dhoti and his chadar. And then when he goes to the temple to perform his puja to the Shiva Lingam, hopefully he takes a shower, puts on a clean dhoti and a chadar or a kurta, and then goes to the temple and does his worship. But the point is, he doesn't have two wardrobes. Even the priests, even the Brahmins in India have only one wardrobe. And when they go on the altar, they wear clean clothes. But they only have one wardrobe, not two. The monks, okay, the monks have a particular uniform. The nuns have a particular uniform. But Devaki, has she totally mixes up this idea of a general uniform for an entire religious community and what monks and nuns wear. So therefore, her example of nuns is irrelevant. Let's continue. Interesting to note that in former times, no sincere men of any ancient spiritual path would wear pants and shirt. No duh, because they didn't exist then. They wore some kind of loose-fitting robes. Yeah, but look, you find tons of extremely conservative Christians, for example, since we're talking about the Western world, centuries ago, when they were already wearing pants, and today also. So wearing pants, and long skirts is not an impediment to being a devout, modest Christian. Somehow or other, it's like what I told Namras and Venkat Bhatt, the kryptonite of ISKCON is pants, Like, we can engage modern music, we can engage, pizza in Krishna service, we can engage computers in Krishna service, cars in Krishna service, internet in Krishna service, but pants, somehow or other, it's like kryptonite. You bring kryptonite to Superman, he just melts away. He can't deal with kryptonite. It's crazy. Devotional clothes. Okay, so here we go. Devotional clothes. Devotional clothes are designed to reduce gross bodily identification and subdue the false ego. If we stick to the framework of the sari and dhoti, which Krishna has given us, Krishna has also given us pants. Krishna has also given us t-shirts. Krishna has also given us everything. Why would Prabhupada in 1977 define the word grihasta dress as nice coat pants? Gentlemen, in February of 1977, in a conversation, Prabhupada talks about the grihasta dress And he defines it as nice coat pants gentlemen. And in Hawaii, in another conversation, he talks about dressing in the mode of goodness while having a mode of ignorance consciousness, but dressing in the mode of goodness. And the example he gives is wearing normal Western clothes. So this idea that somehow or other, as soon as you put on pants, those pants are ontologically in the mode of ignorance is ridiculous. It's ridiculous and it's violent. So Krishna has given us the dhotis and at the same time practice sincerely the process of devotional service. Our bodily identification and false ego will gradually be reduced. This is the power of Krishna's culture. So chant Hare Krishna, right? Follow the four regs, which is what scripture says. But now you have to imitate how Krishna dresses in the 10th canto. And where is that justification? Where is that Shastra? Where is that a prescriptive statement in scripture that says that you have to dress like Krishna dresses in the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam? Where is that verse? I've been looking for one verse from the Bhagavatam or from Chaitanya Charitamrita or from Rupa Goswami's, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that says specifically you should wear Indian clothes, you should wear Vedic clothes, you should wear a sari, you should wear a dhoti. Where is that? Rupa Goswami mentions tilak, he mentions tulsi in his Nectar of Devotion, but nowhere is there any verse I've seen which instructs the sadhaka to imitate how Krishna dresses in the spiritual world. As a matter of fact, Bhaktivinoda Thakur criticizes those who imitate. He calls them sahajas. So is there a trend of sahajaism in ISKCON, for example, ISKCON Hungary, where, it's like, when you go to New Brajadam, it's like you're in Goloka Vrindavan, and it's like this sort of imitation where, the more we dress as gopas and gopis, then the more we're getting, extra bonus points from Lord Chaitanya. Wrong. And on the contrary, if we're driving away a large percentage of the mainstream society in which we're living, we're actually doing a disservice to the mission. We're displeasing Krishna. So here we go. She's begging the question by accepting devotional dress. So it's like right away, she without even justifying, she's saying a sari, a dhoti, and a kurta are devotional dress, right? No, the definition of, because again, a prostitute in Dhaka, for example, wears a sari. Is that devotional dress? A butcher, killing a goat or a cow in Tamil Nadu wearing a dhoti, is that devotional dress? I mean, this idea that devotional dress, no matter what you do, excuse me, somehow I feel like I'm channeling Trump, and I apologize because I do not like him as much as I do not. Anyway, let's not talk politics. The point is, clothes are neutral. They're neutral fibers, okay? Get over it, Devaki. Clothes are neutral pieces of cloth. What you do with them, of course, how you put them around your body, granted, but once if you put on clean clothes, then whether they're Indian or whether they're Western, what you do with those clothes is what defines them as devotional or not devotional. So just because a sari is a sari does not make it devotional. If a woman puts on a sari and does devotional service, then her clothes are devotional. If I wear a sweater and a sports jacket and I'm speaking about Krishna, these clothes are just as much devotional as the sari of the woman who's going on the altar. What you do with your clothes defines them as devotional or not. I've observed, she says, by accepting devotional dress, we agree to the structure that he has given us and will gradually give up the strong hankering to be different and unique. Again, we see it, as I told you about, this Loy Bazaar clique of, and you see that all over the world, like these fashion sari and dhoti wallas, kirtan melas, and then those who have the finest dhotis and the finest saris, and the finest matching colors. That's very vain, very superficial. I'm not saying that all of them are like that, and many of them probably just have those clothes in their closet, just put it on and focus on the real thing, which is chanting Hare Krishna. But if you're going to say that, everyone who wears a sari and a dhoti and a kurta don't think at all about their looks and attracting attention, you got to be kidding me. In recent history, I've observed all kinds of new fashions entering our ISKCON society that invite the influence of the mode of passion and no longer have the uplifting effect of devotional dress. Long skirts with tight-fitting tops, for example, with somewhat emphasizing the bodily lines and figures. Yeah, I remember once there was a Kuli Mela reunion in New Mayapur, France. This must have been 20 years ago, and there was a bonfire. And I was young. I was 20, so I guess I could fit in that crowd at that time. And it was not only children born of the movement. It was just basically a gathering of young devotees, and nobody was wearing traditional Indian clothes because it was kind of cold. But I'll always remember, and I was a young man, heterosexual. There was one girl from Poland. She was the only one wearing a sari. And she was, as Devaki says, wearing it really inappropriately. Like, you could see anyway, you get my point. There was a midriff that was crazy big. And I looked at the men, and I remember all the men's eyes were focused on her. And she was the one wearing transcendental fashion. And the other ladies in the group were just wearing jeans or pants, and nobody thought twice because they were not attracting undue attention to their body. So this idea that somehow or other saris and dhotis are transcendental, and you put them on, not only do they not attract attention to the body, but somehow your consciousness becomes free of lust and desire for name and fame is nonsense. It's nonsense. So sari and dhoti are definitely the topmost spiritual fashion. Oh yeah? Okay. Again, where's the prescriptive shastric statement? Let me make a distinction here between descriptive and prescriptive statements of scripture. Descriptive is, this is what it looks like. This is what it looked like. This is what it looked like when Krishna was here 5,000 years ago. Description. Krishna wore shark-shaped earrings. Gopis wore bangles. The Gopas wore turbans, long flower garlands. Okay, Karnikara, flowers on their ears, and so on. Okay, descriptions. Then there's prescriptive verses. Do this, don't do that. Harer Nama, Harer Nama, Harer Nama Eva Kevalam, Kalo Nasya. Follow the four regulative principles. Wake up early in the morning, chant Hare Krishna, worship the deity, hear Srimad Bhagavatam. Those are prescriptive verses. And Devaki is a victim to confounding descriptive verses with prescriptive verses. In other words, just because there's descriptions of how Krishna dressed, for example, 5,000 years ago when he was here, that automatically means that we have to imitate. That verse is also a prescriptive verse. No. It's only a descriptive verse, not a prescriptive. So this idea that, sari and dhoti are definitely the topmost spiritual fashion because they remind us of a Goloka Vrindavan and are what Krishna, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and the gopis wear. It's like, no. And for the majority of people on earth, when they see, devotees dressed up in their Indian clothes, it doesn't remind them of Krishna. It tells them that these are people who are really in love with Indian external culture and who pretend to practice a spiritual science, but and they put so much emphasis on the way they dress. And you know what I mean? Like, it reminds them of Krishna? No, what reminds them of Krishna is the holy name, my friends. Shastra says that when you chant Hare Krishna, that reminds the soul of the spiritual world. Golokera Premadana Harinam Sankirtan, the treasure house of love of God from Goloka Vrindavan has descended on this planet, Narottam Das Thakur tells us, not by the wearing of traditional Indian clothes or Vedic clothes. It comes down into this world by the practice of Harinam Sankirtan. Simple for the simple. And the translation to Chaitanya Charitamrita, Devaki continues, Madhya 14.195, we read, when Krishna comes forward and greedily snatches at the border of her sari, Radharani is actually very pleased with him, but she tries to stop him. Okay? So again, because there's a description of Radharani wearing a sari, we have to imitate? That smells like Sahajaism to me. In the word-for-word translation of Srimad Bhagavatam 4.21.17, Prabhupada gives the word for dukula agriye, dressed with the dhoti. So what? Even if, and it's controversial, whether the actual word dhoti appears in Bhagavatam is a controversial topic. I can't get into it because I don't know Sanskrit. But and Prabhupada took a lot of liberties in his translation. So just because Prabhupada translated a particular word in a particular way doesn't mean that it's a literal translation. It doesn't make Prabhupada any less of a pure devotee, but he took a lot of liberties with, how he translated words. And it's besides the point anyway. But I'll continue. The full translation of the verse being, quote, the black slick hair on his head was very fine and curly. So why don't we imitate that, huh? Long hair. Why don't we imitate that? So you see, this is where this cultish mentality comes in where, without any sort of standard, no, we should wear short hair and shaved head. Why? Because Prabhupada said it. But he only said it for his brahmacharis, we could argue. So we can't imitate Krishna with long hair, but we should definitely imitate him with dhoti. How weird is that? He wore a very valuable dhoti and there was a nice wrapper on the upper part of his body. Okay, description doesn't mean prescription. Furthermore, in all the paintings done by our ISKCON art department, Lord Vishnu is depicted as wearing a yellow dhoti. Again, the Sanskrit usually says pita ambara, or yellow dress or garment, but this is depicted as a dhoti. Why? Because Srila Prabhupada instructed the artist to show it that way. Srila Prabhupada personally supervised the paintings down to the small details. If he chose to show Lord Vishnu in a yellow dhoti, how could we argue that a dhoti is not a spiritual dress? No. You're mixing material and spiritual, Devaki. Because by the same token, you could say, well, look, it's very clear that Mother Yashoda ran after Krishna with a rope. It was a rope. The Bhagavatam mentions a rope. So therefore, because she was using a rope to tie up Krishna, then that means that all ropes in the material world are spiritual. They're transcendental items. No. So, but it's the same logic. Oh, because Krishna wore a dhoti in the spiritual world, therefore all dhotis in the material world are somehow transcendental. No, it's the exact same logic. Krishna was under the cart with the cart demon, right? It was like a cart, a wooden cart that the demon disguised himself in his shape-shifting way. But it looked like a cart. So because there's carts in the spiritual world in Goloka Vrindavan, now all of a sudden, carts in the material world are spiritual. I mean, what a stupid logic, What a stupid logic. Mother Yashoda cooks, cooks butter. She prepares yogurt. So, there's yogurt in the spiritual world. So that means that all yogurt in the material world is transcendental? No. But somehow or other, because Krishna wears a dhoti in the spiritual world, that means that automatically all dhotis in the material world are transcendental. What a stupid, dangerous idea. Srila Prabhupada instructed us to wear devotional clothes. First of all, what does devotional clothes mean? There are instructions by Prabhupada telling devotees to wear robes. In most of the cases, the word saffron, brahmachari, is connected to those words. He's making those instructions in an ISKCON of the 1960s and 70s, where basically everyone was a brahmachari and a brahmacharini, even the few householders, with the rare exceptions like Ambarish Prabhu, or some very few financially independent householders. And Prabhupada also never went over the conclusion of the Bhagavatam. And so we have to look at everything that Prabhupada said about dress, especially in the light of what the Bhagavatam says. And the Bhagavatam, has a speaker who's naked. Shukadev Goswami is naked, friends. So if dress was so important, why did Shukadev Goswami wear nothing? And secondly, Lord Brahma in the 10th canto, we always come back to this verse, says, Stanistitaha gyane prayasa manta eva jivanti sanmukaritam bhavadiya varta stanistitaha, while remaining established in one's social situation. All you have to do is give submissive oral reception to Krishna while remaining in your social situation, which means while remaining dressed how everybody else dresses in your society. Just make it clean and modest, that's all. So this idea that Prabhupada instructed us to wear devotional clothes, he brought saris back from India, granted, for his ladies, but does that mean that forever, financially independent women outside of India or whatever are barred or should never or are not pleasing Krishna as much when they wear clean, modest clothes from their own countries while worshiping Krishna? Nonsense. Himself setting the example of never compromising, even in the coldest winter. Prabhupada was a sannyasi from India, externally speaking. So he wore the sannyas dress and he wore the dhotis which he traditionally wore in India. So what? So again, imposing an ashram consideration upon an entire religious community. Of course, Prabhupada wore a dhoti, but there's a statement in one of the letters. He says that, I wear dhoti, but if there's a circumstance where I should wear, Western clothes, I would do it without any hesitation, or I would do it right away. And he told his sannyasi disciples to also do that occasionally. For example, Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj with the Bhaktivedanta Institute. There's photographs of Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj, sannyasi, wearing a suit and tie in certain circumstances for preaching. So even a sannyasi can adjust his dress according to time, place, and circumstance for certain situations to preach more effectively. But the householder Vaishnava, to begin with, does not have a Vaishnava uniform. It does not exist. It has never existed, will never exist, especially, but hopefully, unless devotees like Devaki convince the majority of devotees in ISKCON that there are. And if they do that, they're the instruments of Kali, I'm sorry. So, continuing. The power of a uniform should not be underestimated. Sorry, Devaki, the Vaishnavas have never had a uniform that distinguishes them from the rest of society. Sorry. So if you really love uniforms, Devaki, why don't you become a Mennonite? Why don't you become an Amish? Why don't you become a Sikh? Why don't you, join the Shabbat Jewish movement? Right? And I say this very respectfully. Of course, she would never do that. She's a very dedicated Vaishnavi and loves Prabhupada and Lord Chaitanya and so on. But the point is, sorry to disappoint you, Devaki, Vaishnavism, Sanatan Dharma traditions in general, and Vaishnavism in particular, are a very uniform, light tradition, as opposed to what you believe, a uniform, heavy tradition. There is no Vaishnava uniform. Sorry. So yeah. Monks can wear uniforms, and for them it's good to have a uniform, ashram residents. But for congregation members, sorry, we're not Shabbat, we're not Sikhs, we're not Amish, we're not Mennonites, we're Vaishnavas. And Vaishnava means come as you are, as Lord Chaitanya himself showed in Navadvip, and as Lord Brahma mentions in the 10th canto. And if you want to, stand out, put tilak, have tea and tulsi, as Rupa Goswami mentions in the Nectar of Devotion. The power of a uniform should not be underestimated. It increases our identification with the role we're meant to play. Yes, okay. Therefore, policemen. So, Prabhupada gave the policeman analogy, and I'm surprised she doesn't, milk this example, because a lot of devotees milk the policeman analogy. But I'll get to it right now after I read this sentence. Therefore, policemen, doctors, soldiers, fire brigade, and so on wear uniforms to strengthen their identification with this position. So, a devotee strengthens his identification as being Krishna's servant by wearing Vaishnava dress. Again, she's begging the question, what is Vaishnava dress? I'm speaking about Krishna right now. I just finished my puja to my Shalagram Shilas. I was wearing clean clothes with a clean Western sweater, a clean sports jacket. I'm sorry, that's Vaishnava dress. Sorry. And the Jalabas, that the Patan Vaishnavas that Lord Chaitanya converted to Vaishnavism, mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita, those Jalabas became Vaishnava dress once they converted to Vaishnavism. By the way, Kaviraj Goswami mentions nothing about them, being told by Lord Chaitanya to cut off their long beards. And you see traditional paintings of Haridas Thakur having a beard and having the sort of the Muslim lungi. So this idea that, somehow Vaishnavism means shaved head and a shika for men and saris for women always and dhotis and kurta for men is a sahaja speculation that has no foundation in Shastra. It also requires courage to do so in public. Yeah, unfortunately, and that's why a lot of senior devotees in our movement, first generation, feel threatened when we speak like this because they sacrificed a lot to stand out with this dress, with this idea that, we're pleasing Prabhupada more, we're pleasing Lord Chaitanya more, when in fact, perhaps they were actually only making their job harder. Because if they had just dressed like normal people and just really shone and stood out by what came out of their mouths, the message of the Bhagavat, as Raghunath sang in the Shelter song, Message of the Bhagavat, the message of the Bhagavatam, the message of the Bhagavad Gita, then probably a lot more people would have become devotees because they could identify with the devotee. The pasture smells like the sheep. So this idea that, it requires courage to basically make a fool out of yourself as a householder, in public by dressing like a standard Indian way of dressing or West Bengali dress. Why? It's like, yeah, I'm very proud that I'm stabbing myself in the leg. Look how much blood is coming out of my leg. Look how much sacrifice I'm doing for Krishna. Dude, Krishna never told you to stab yourself in the leg. It immensely helps us to increase our spiritual strength and conviction. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Many devotees are very demoralized. Many devotees lack confidence. Many devotees are dysfunctional in their own, Western societies. Why? Because they've been marginalized by their own false conviction preached to them that they have to somehow, look like freaks, in the West and somehow be total oddballs, in society and therefore have more difficulty finding jobs and making money and so on. But no. Prabhupada mentions in the Nectar of Devotion, one can live without any reducing any material discomfiture. Without material discomfiture, those are the exact words that Prabhupada says. Look at Pundarik Vidyanidhi. He was a very wealthy, comfortable grihasta, eternal associate of Lord Chaitanya, who wore beautiful clothes and so on. So much so that even Radharani, in the form of Gadadhar Pandit, doubted that he was a Vaishnava. Until Mukunda sang a song, a verse from the Bhagavatam, which made Pundarik Vidyanidhi go into rapture and showing Gadadhar Pandit that, whoa, here's a great Vaishnava, right? We openly stand to the fact that we are Krishna's devotees, a soldier in Srila Prabhupada's mission. Yeah, we do, but not by wearing Indian clothes. We do by standing strong on the four regulative principles, by standing strong on our conviction that Radha Krishna is God and his internal potency, by standing strong on the conviction that the Srimad Bhagavatam is the spotless Purana, by standing strong on, the conviction that Krishna's words in the Bhagavad Gita are actually Krishna's words, by standing strong on chanting Hare Krishna. That's what makes us a soldier in Prabhupada's army. And what makes us a soldier in Prabhupada's army is precisely knowing how to adjust according to time and circumstance so that we can tweak a little bit here and tweak a little bit there without, of course, compromising our core beliefs and practices, as just mentioned, so that a few more souls can come to Krishna. That's Prabhupada's mood. Not, imitating in a Sahaja style, Krishna's, the descriptions of how Krishna dresses in the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam. Just because there's a verse that says that Krishna, snatched Radharani's sari. So what? I mean, it's divine. We worship those pastimes, but it doesn't mean we have to imitate them. That's Sahajaism, if you ask me. Devotional dress is not only uplifting to the wearer's consciousness, but it also promotes a transcendental mindset and uplifts others around us. Yeah, not really. Not really. You know how many times, just the other day I met this French guy, and he's an Indian. He was Indian-born, French-born from an Indian background. He went to a very, very prestigious engineering school. He came to New Mayapur for the first time with his parents and his brother. And he told me, when we see Hare Krishnas dancing over there in Paris, everyone's like, oh my God, who are these weirdos? Who are these weirdos? Now, if they're monks, if they're brahmacharis, I told them, hey, that's legit. If you have a problem with that, then look, brahmacharis wearing orange, going out and chanting Hare Krishna, don't criticize them because they're legit, But what's a problem is all the white or black or Arab, whatever, non-Indian, and even Indian, we're in the West. And there is such a thing as a mainstream way of dressing. Okay, this is something that Venkat Bhatt during the Namrat's podcast was trying to challenge. What does it mean to be American? What does it mean to be Western? Like this deconstructionist ad infinitum woke philosophy, agenda to absolutely deconstruct any form of epistemological foundation on which to build an argument. Nonsense. Everyone knows what mainstream dressing is in 2025, right? So when those devotees from that culture, mainstream majority culture, abdicate their own mainstream way of dressing and start, cosplaying, the way householders in West Bengal before the Industrial Revolution dress and jump up and down in the streets of Paris, yeah, there can be criticism and justfully and rightfully so. I'm not saying we shouldn't do Harinam Sankirtan. I'm saying devotees should dress in their own local Western clothes and do Harinam Sankirtan if they're not monks, So, as the saying goes, we eat to please ourselves and we dress to please others. Yes, exactly. We dress so that others can identify with us, not that they feel repelled from us or unidentified with us. And fortunately, the householders have that responsibilities. The brahmacharis and sannyasis are socially dead. They're outside of society. So we don't blame them for wearing a sort of out of this world uniform. But it's the grihastas who are supposed to build cultural bridges between themselves and the very people they're trying to preach to. So if they also abdicate their own culture, then they're doing a great disservice to the mission with this false renunciation. Last few paragraphs. If we try hard enough, we can, of course, turn the most transcendental fashion of a sari into a fashion in the mode of passion. Yes, by wearing it in a very provocative and revealing way. Yes, good point, Devaki. We will address this topic in the chapter entitled Two Kinds of Beauty. Sorry, I'm not going to read that chapter. Of course, on the topic of transcendental fashion, it does not mean that there might be some situations in our daily life when we have to wear non-devotional dress. Again, what does non-devotional dress mean? What is devotional dress? We looked at that. Any clothes in the mode of goodness that you're using to serve Krishna, that's devotional dress, okay? Simple. If we work in an office, we will not be able to wear a sari or a dhoti, or sometimes for the sake of preaching, if we don't want to unnecessarily confront a non-devotee with the day of the spiritualist. It could create some blocks and cultural barriers. Yeah, you can say that again. Which will make it more difficult for the person new to spiritual practice to be open-hearted. Yes, and so therefore, why should we make this adjustment only when some devotee is on the street, for example, trying to give a book of Prabhupada to somebody? Our own pujaris on our own ISKCON altars should be wearing Western clothes, as long as they're clean and modest. Of course, the pujaris in ISKCON, hear that again, the pujaris in ISKCON in the West should all be wearing mainstream, modest, absolutely impeccably clean Western clothes on the altar. Oh, but what about non-stitched clothes? Prabhupada wore stitched clothes. Swallow that one. Prabhupada, the founder Acharya, wore stitched clothes all the time when doing puja. When he installed Radha Shamasundar in Vrindavan Dham, when he initiated devotees, when he installed the deity of Radha Parisheshwara, Radha Landaneshwara, Krishna Balaram, always wore stitched clothes. So deal with that problem. Oh, we shouldn't imitate Prabhupada. What does it mean to be a founder Acharya? What does it mean to be an Acharya? Last paragraph, my friends. The real issue is how much have we ourselves transformed our tastes, likes and dislikes? In which kind of fashion do we feel most comfortable? We feel most comfortable in the fashion that is clean, modest, that we don't think twice about what we put on our body, and that is neutral, culturally neutral, so that we as preachers who understand that we have nothing else to do on this planet but to be examples of Krishna consciousness before we leave our body, so that the maximum number of souls can take their steps towards Krishna. That's what should determine what kind of clothes we wear. Are we still attached to and most comfortable in our tight jeans, short or mini skirts? Well, what about long skirts? What about loose jeans if they're clean? Why always pit the worst of the West with the best of India, Devaki? Huh? Or have we transformed our material taste and feel most comfortable in devotional dress? Again, what does devotional dress mean? These are two separate points that we should not confuse. Our own transformation of taste and what we might sometimes wear when dealing with non-devotees. So like we develop this schizophrenic thing, like, oh, okay, we have our non-devotional clothes when we're preaching to people. We're preaching all day. We're always preaching. St. Francis of Assisi said, spend your whole life preaching and sometimes, if necessary, say a few words. We're always preaching. So this idea that, only when we open our mouths outside the geographical precinct of an ISKCON temple, that's when we're preaching. But, when we're inside the precinct of an ISKCON temple, that's when we're somehow not preaching and therefore should wear Indian clothes and therefore should have two wardrobes at home, a devotional wardrobe and a karmi wardrobe. The word karmi dress, by the way, was invented by Prabhupada disciples. It was never invented by Prabhupada. You look it up on the database. It's always a Prabhupada disciple who came up with that term, and Prabhupada a few times repeated it, but he never came up with that term, karmi dress. So devotees who are supposed to live simple lives of high thinking have two wardrobes. And the karmis that devotees criticize so much, the meat-eating karmis. I mean, of course, meat-eating is, we decry that, but, the karmis, they have one wardrobe, one. And we, the Vaishnavas who are supposed to, simple living, high thinking, we have two wardrobes, twice as complicated. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said another word for Vaishnavism is simplicity. Hello, anyone? But no, Devaki Mataji, Devaki Devi Dasi is forcing you to believe that you should have two wardrobes and have a schizophrenic attitude towards yourself and towards your identity as a Vaishnava. Two wardrobes, schizophrenic. The schizophrenic Vaishnava. She's preaching a philosophy of schizophrenia. It's insane. Our personal tastes and preferences reflect our subtle identification. Once our identification with being Krishna's servant and a soldier in Srila Prabhupada's mission deepens, we will feel more comfortable and natural in devotional clothes. The external dress becomes internalized. No, it's wrong. Devaki, the more you become identified as Krishna's soldier, Prabhupada's soldier and a servant of Krishna, the more you are strict about following the four regulative principles, the more you are eager to hear and chant about Krishna, the more you are eager to do anything possible, including adjusting the way you dress, hint, hint, to make the largest number of souls comfortable with Krishna consciousness. It has nothing to do with dress, Devaki. And so for you, after 50 years or 40 years of devotional service, being so hung up on the dress, on externals, as a symptom of, of whether or not you've become a deep, devoted servant of Krishna is ridiculous. It's scandalous. It's scandalous. And someone who preaches like this should be ashamed of himself or herself. So I'm done. If you want to read the books, I highly recommend them. Just don't read the part on dress code because Devaki's got it really wrong. Having said that, and as I said at the very beginning, I respect Devaki as a Vaishnavi. She says a lot of wonderful other things in her other books. She behaves in a very, at least with me, exemplary manner. And she's helping ISKCON and Lord Chaitanya's movement in so many significant other ways, right? So if I've offended anyone by my words, please forgive me. And let us pray to Lord Chaitanya that he continues to empower us and guide us to serve him properly. Thank you for listening, and Hare Krishna. Thank you once again.